The rain hammered Hillsdale's empty streets at 2 a.m. when Garrett Sullivan found her. A woman lay crumpled against his front door, designer coat soaked through, blood at the corner of her mouth. Each breath seemed to cost her everything. Her expensive clothes told a story of wealth and violence, torn fabric revealing injuries that spoke of someone's deliberate cruelty. When desperate eyes met his through the porch light's yellow glow, her voice was barely audible. "No more pain. My ribs are already broken." The single father stood frozen in the December storm. Call 911 and let the system handle whatever nightmare had brought her here, or bring a stranger into his daughter's carefully protected world. Behind him, 8-year-old Lily slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that her father was about to make a decision that would change everything. "Please," the woman whispered, rain mixing with tears on her bruised face. "They're still hunting me." Garrett Sullivan had grown accustomed to sleepless nights. 3 years of single parenthood would do that to a man. He'd just finished his security shift at Hillsdale General Hospital, driving his pickup through the rain toward home. At 40, Garrett had learned to find peace in routine. Work at Murphy's Auto Repair, pick up 8-year-old Lily from school, then his night security job. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was what he'd built after Sarah died. He pulled into his driveway and killed the engine. Through the passenger window, he could see his house, a 1950s bungalow where Lily would be fast asleep upstairs. That's when he saw the shape huddled against his front door. She was curled on her side, one arm wrapped around her ribs, the other reaching toward his door. Her expensive coat was torn and blood-stained. Her breathing came in shallow, painful sips. Her eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her. They weren't the eyes of someone seeking help, but someone who had lost everything. When she spoke, her voice was broken glass. "No more pain. My ribs are already broken." "Are you going to call the police?" she asked. Garrett studied her face. Mid-40s, weathered but kind, with laugh lines that looked unused. "Should I?" "No," she whispered. "Please don't call anyone yet." Garrett made his decision with gut instinct. "Can you walk?" "I think so," she said, and reached for his outstretched hand. 3 days later, Lily Sullivan was explaining to her stuffed elephant why the nice lady sleeping on their couch needed extra quiet time. Victoria had been recovering slowly, accepting Garrett's care with awkward gratitude. She'd given them a story about being mugged, about having nowhere else to go. The story had holes, but Garrett had learned not to push. He'd called in sick to both jobs for the first time in 3 years. Victoria had insisted on helping with expenses, pulling crisp $100 bills from her wallet. The money made Garrett uncomfortable, but Lily needed new winter boots, and the heating bill was past due. "She talks funny," Lily announced over breakfast, spooning cereal with focused concentration. "Like she's always thinking about something else. Some people have a lot on their minds," Garrett replied diplomatically. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully but steady. She'd borrowed some of Sarah's clothes, jeans, and a sweater that hung differently on her taller frame, but somehow looked right. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger than it had been. "I hope I didn't wake anyone." Lily beamed at her with the instant acceptance that children excel at. "Daddy was just telling me about how some people think a lot. Do you think a lot?" Victoria's smile was genuine, transforming her face from quietly pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Sometimes too much," she admitted, accepting the coffee Garrett offered her. "What do you think about art?" Lily said without hesitation. "And birds. And why Mrs. Rodriguez's cat is so fat when she says she only feeds him a little bit." The conversation flowed easily, Victoria asking about Lily's drawings, Garrett finding himself relaxed in a way he'd almost forgotten. For 20 minutes, they were just a family having breakfast. When the doorbell rang, all three froze. Garrett moved to the window, peering through the blinds. A man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, shifting restlessly. Behind him, a black sedan idled at the curb. "Victoria," Garrett said quietly. "I think you need to see this." She looked through the window, and all color drained from her face. Her hand went instinctively to her ribs. "That's Marcus," she whispered. "My brother." It started with Marcus playing the concerned brother through the door, claiming Victoria was mentally unstable and needed help. Then came legal threats about declaring her incompetent. But when he mentioned Child Protective Services and Garrett's military record, the conversation moved beyond words. "The restraining order will be filed within the hour," Victoria said, ending a call to her lawyers. "But Marcus made a mistake. He threatened you and Lily. That makes this personal." "Victoria," Garrett said carefully, "I need to understand what we're really dealing with." She was quiet, then spoke with the weight of long-held secrets. "My father built Ashford Industries, but he made deals with questionable people. When I took over, I spent 5 years cleaning house, cutting ties with anyone whose practices I couldn't stomach. Marcus disagreed with losing those income streams." "How long has he been trying to kill you?" 6 months. Brake failure, gas leak, last week's car accident. Every attempt deniably accidental." "Why haven't you gone to the FBI?" "With what evidence? Marcus is careful. Every threat implied, never explicit. Who believes a respected businessman is trying to murder his sister?" "I believe it," Garrett said quietly. The simple statement bridged an impossible chasm. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're here. Because you chose to trust us instead of facing this alone." Outside, a car door slammed. Marcus was coming back with more men. "What's our play?" Garrett asked. "We don't let him win," Victoria said. "Whatever it costs." The front door exploded inward with the sound of splintering wood and twisted metal. Garrett had exactly 3 seconds to process what was happening before training older than his grief took over completely. "Lily, stay down!" he shouted toward the stairs, then spun toward Victoria. "Behind the kitchen counter now." 4 men poured through the doorway with military precision, black tactical gear, and weapons that meant business. But they'd made their first mistake by assuming they were dealing with a civilian. Garrett Sullivan had spent 2 tours in Afghanistan learning how to stay alive when people with better equipment wanted him dead. The first shot came from Marcus, wild and angry, punching a hole in the wall 6 inches from Garrett's head. Amateur. Garrett dropped low, using the overturned coffee table as cover while his mind automatically catalogued threats and assets. 4 shooters, entry points covered, but they were bunched up in the doorway like they'd learned tactics from movies instead of combat. Victoria had made it to the kitchen, smart enough to stay low and quiet. Lily's voice had gone silent upstairs, which either meant she was hiding like he'd taught her or... No, he couldn't think about that now. The second gunman, professional by his movement, swept left toward the kitchen. Garrett put 2 round center mass before the man could acquire Victoria as a target. The sound was deafening in the confined space, but familiar. He'd heard it before, in places where hesitation meant death. "Sullivan!" Marcus screamed from behind the wall, his voice cracking with panic. "Give me my sister and nobody else gets hurt." Garrett almost laughed. Nobody else gets hurt. As if Victoria's broken ribs and the terror in Lily's eyes weren't hurt enough already. As if 3 years of careful peace hadn't just been shattered by greed and family dysfunction. The third gunman tried to flank around the far side of the living room, moving with the kind of overconfidence that got people killed. Garrett let him think he had the angle, then put a round through his shoulder as he emerged from cover. Not fatal, but enough to take him out of the fight and send a message to the others that this wasn't going to be the easy takedown they'd planned. "Daddy!" Lily's voice from upstairs, terrified but alive. The sound gave Garrett something he'd been missing for 3 years: absolute clarity about what mattered and what he was willing to do to protect it. Marcus appeared in the doorway, using his fourth man as a human shield, gun pressed against the professional's temple. "Last chance, Sullivan. She's my sister, my family, my responsibility." "Your responsibility." Garrett's voice was calm, conversational, the tone he'd used in Afghanistan when explaining to insurgents why their surrender was in everyone's best interest. "Is that what you call attempted murder these days? She's destroying everything our father built. Someone has to stop her before she—" The kitchen window exploded inward as Victoria put a cast iron skillet through the glass, creating noise and distraction at exactly the right moment. Garrett moved while Marcus was startled, closing the distance between them in 3 quick steps. The human shield tried to bring his weapon up, but 20 years of self-defense training and 3 years of suppressed rage made Garrett faster. He trapped the man's gun arm against his body, drove an elbow into his solar plexus, and relieved him of his weapon in one fluid motion that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. Marcus, suddenly alone and outgunned, made the same mistake that entitled people always made when reality finally caught up with their assumptions. He assumed that having money and connections and a sense of righteousness would somehow stop bullets or change the basic physics of violence. "You don't understand," he said, backing toward the broken doorway, his expensive suit torn and his face streaked with plaster dust. "She's worth billions, billions, and she's throwing it all away to play house with some nobody mechanic and his brat!" The words hit Garrett like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they revealed exactly who Marcus Ashford really was. Not a concerned brother or a business rival, but a man so small and broken that he couldn't comprehend love that wasn't measured in quarterly reports. "Get out," Garrett said quietly, his weapon trained on Marcus's center mass. "Take your unconscious friend, leave the other one for the paramedics, and get out of my house. This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Victoria's voice from the kitchen doorway, calm and final as a judge pronouncing sentence. "It's over, Marcus. I've already signed the papers transferring my shares to the employee trust. You can't have what doesn't exist anymore." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions that would have been funny if they weren't attached to a man who'd just tried to commit murder for money. Confusion, disbelief, rage, and finally something that looked almost like grief. "You destroyed it," he whispered. "Everything Dad built, everything we worked for. You destroyed it all for this?" He gestured around the modest living room with its second-hand furniture and family photos, as if he couldn't comprehend how anyone would choose ordinary happiness over extraordinary wealth. "No," Victoria said, stepping out from behind the counter to stand beside Garrett, her hand finding his free arm. "I finally built something worth keeping." The sirens were getting closer now, Mrs. Rodriguez's emergency call finally bringing help that would clean up the mess and ask the questions and write the reports that would put Marcus Ashford away for a very long time. But in this moment, in this broken living room with 2 wounded men on the floor and gun smoke hanging in the air like incense, Garrett felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Not the careful, fragile peace he'd constructed from routine and avoidance, but the deep, unshakable peace that came from standing up for what mattered and discovering you were strong enough to protect it. "Daddy!" Lily's voice again, closer now, probably coming down the stairs to see if it was safe. "It's okay, sweetheart," he called back, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "The bad men are leaving now." And they were. Marcus helped his unconscious associate to his feet, both of them moving with the careful attention of people who'd just learned the difference between theoretical violence and the real thing. The wounded man would need an ambulance, but he'd live to reconsider his career choices. As the police cars finally pulled into the driveway, lights flashing red and blue through the broken windows, Garrett allowed himself to look at Victoria. Really look at her, not as the mysterious woman who'd collapsed on his porch, or the wealthy executive hiding from her dangerous family, but as the partner who'd thrown a skillet through a window to give him the distraction he needed. "Nice timing with the skillet," he said. "Nice shooting," she replied, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Respect, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that they'd faced something terrible together and come through it not just alive, but stronger. Lily appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her stuffed elephant clutched in one arm, and her eyes wide with the kind of adrenaline that comes after real danger has passed. She looked at the broken furniture, the holes in the walls, the strangers being led away in handcuffs, and then at her father and Victoria standing together in the wreckage. "Are we safe now?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than any 8-year-old should have to bear. "Yes," Garrett said, and for the first time in 3 years he believed it completely. "We're safe." Victoria stood in what remained of Garrett's living room, giving her statement to Detective Hayes with the calm precision of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms where every word mattered. The restraining order her lawyers had filed that morning would be upgraded to criminal charges by evening. The FBI agents who'd been investigating Ashford Industries' cleaned-up business practices would suddenly find themselves with a cooperative witness instead of an evasive subject. And Marcus Ashford's carefully constructed facade of respectability was crumbling faster than he could build new lies to support it. But none of that mattered as much as the 8-year-old girl who'd spent the entire battle hiding in her bedroom closet, clutching a stuffed elephant and trying to understand why her safe world had exploded into violence and sirens and strangers with badges asking complicated questions. Garrett found Lily exactly where he'd expected to find her, in the corner of her closet behind a wall of winter coats, her sketchpad open on her lap, and tears streaking down her face. She looked up at him with the kind of trust that could break a father's heart, the absolute faith that Daddy could fix anything, even when Daddy wasn't sure he could fix himself. "Is Miss Victoria okay?" were the first words out of her mouth, not questions about her own safety, or the men who'd broken down their door, or the holes in the living room walls that would need explaining to insurance companies. "She's okay," Garrett said, settling into the closet beside his daughter and pulling her into his lap. "We're all okay." "Are the bad men gone?" "They're gone. They won't be coming back." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the serious consideration that children bring to life-changing events. Then she held up her sketchpad, showing him a drawing she'd apparently been working on during the chaos downstairs. It was their house, recognizable despite the artistic liberties that 8-year-old perspective required. But instead of the small family of 2 that had lived there for 3 years, the drawing showed 3 figures standing in front of the door. A man with dark hair and broad shoulders, a woman with yellow hair and a smile, and a little girl with pigtails holding both their hands. "Is this our family now?" Lily asked, her voice small but hopeful. Garrett looked at the drawing, at his daughter's earnest face, at the future she'd imagined while their present was exploding around them. 3 days ago, he would have said that their family was complete as it was, that they didn't need anyone else, that love was too dangerous to risk twice in one lifetime. But 3 days ago, he hadn't known what it felt like to have Victoria's quiet strength beside him, her steady presence turning their house into something that felt like home instead of just shelter. He hadn't known what it was like to watch his daughter bloom under the attention of someone who saw her as more than just a responsibility to be managed. He hadn't remembered what it felt like to be part of something larger than his own grief and guilt. "I think," he said carefully, "that families come in all different shapes, And sometimes they grow in ways you don't expect. So she can stay. From downstairs came the sound of Victoria's voice, calm and professional as she finished giving her statement. In a few hours, she'd probably be on her way back to Seattle, back to the corporate empire that needed her leadership, back to the life of power lunches and board meetings and decisions that affected thousands of people she'd never meet. But as Garrett held his daughter and looked at her hopeful drawing, he realized that he didn't want Victoria to leave. Not because he needed her protection or her money or her gratitude, but because somewhere in the chaos of the last 3 days, she'd become part of the equation that made their life add up to something more than just survival. "We'll have to ask her," he told Lily. "Staying here would mean giving up a lot of important things. We can't just assume she'll want to." "But we can ask. We can ask." Detective Hayes finished his interview just as the last of the crime scene technicians were packing up their equipment. The living room looked like a disaster area, but it was their disaster area, and somehow that made all the difference. Victoria stood in the doorway, surveying the damage with the calculating eye of someone who'd spent years turning problems into opportunities. "Insurance will cover most of this," she said as Garrett and Lily came downstairs. "And I know some contractors who can have everything repaired within a week." "You don't have to do that," Garrett said automatically, the response of a man who'd learned to be suspicious of generosity that came too easily. "I know I don't have to," Victoria replied. "I want to. This happened because of me. Because I brought danger to your home. The least I can do is help fix what got broken." Lily tugged on Victoria's borrowed sweater, demanding attention with the persistence that only children could manage. "Miss Victoria, are you going to leave now?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the firefight, visible and choking and impossible to ignore. Victoria knelt down to Lily's eye level, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her healing ribs. "What would you like me to do?" she asked seriously, treating the 8-year-old like her opinion mattered as much as any board of directors. "I'd like you to stay," Lily said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "Daddy's been sad for a really long time, but he smiles more when you're here. And you help me with my drawings, and you make really good pancakes, and you don't talk to me like I'm little." Victoria's composure cracked just slightly, emotions flickering across her face too quickly to catalogue. "Those are very good reasons," she said quietly. "But staying here would mean giving up my job, my company, my life in Seattle. That's a big decision. Bigger than the decision to trust a stranger when you were hurt and scared?" Garrett asked, the question coming out before he could stop himself. Victoria looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw the same moment of possibility that he felt, the same terrifying hope that maybe they'd stumbled into something worth keeping. "The company will survive without me," she said slowly, working through the implications as she spoke. "Marcus's arrest will trigger a full investigation, and the board will have to choose new leadership anyway. I've spent 15 years building something I thought would last forever, but maybe it's time to build something different." "What kind of something?" Lily asked. Victoria smiled then, the expression transforming her face from corporate professional to something warmer and more human. "Maybe the kind of something that includes pancakes and drawing lessons and helping little girls with pigtails feel safe in their own homes." "And maybe," Garrett added, surprising himself with his courage, "the kind of something that includes giving a single dad a reason to remember what it feels like to hope for tomorrow instead of just surviving today, the moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass and twice as precious." Outside, the police cars were pulling away, taking Marcus and his hired muscle toward a future that involved lawyers and courtrooms and consequences that had been a long time coming. Inside, 3 people who'd found each other in the darkness were discovering what it might look like to step into the light together. "So," Victoria said, standing up and brushing off her borrowed jeans, "I guess I should call my assistant and tell her to cancel my meetings for the next few months, possibly the next few years." "Are you sure?" Garrett asked, because fairness demanded that he give her one last chance to choose the safe path, the predictable path, the path that led back to everything she'd worked for instead of forward into the unknown. "I'm sure," Victoria said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there 3 days ago when he'd found her bleeding on his porch. Something that sounded like peace. "I've spent my whole adult life building an empire, and all it got me was a brother who wanted me dead and a fortune I was too busy to enjoy. Maybe it's time to try building a family instead." 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in June, Garrett Sullivan stood in his backyard watching Victoria teach his daughter how to plant tomatoes. The house had been repaired and improved, the living room now bright with windows that let in more light than the old ones ever had. Victoria's touch was evident everywhere. Better coffee in the kitchen, art supplies organized in ways that actually made sense, a home office where she managed her new consulting business. She'd stepped down from Ashford Industries, negotiating a consulting contract that let her maintain some influence while freeing her from the responsibilities that had consumed her life. Marcus was serving 15 years for attempted murder and other charges that emerged during the FBI's investigation. "Daddy, look!" Lily called from the garden, holding up a tomato seedling. "Victoria says this one's going to grow the biggest tomatoes in the whole neighborhood." Just Victoria now, not Miss Victoria, because somewhere along the way she'd stopped being a guest and started being family. The adjustment had taken time for all of them, working through trauma and complicated emotions with Dr. Martinez's help. "The secret," Victoria was explaining, "is giving them room to grow, but not so much room that they feel lost. Plants need space, but they also need to know they're connected to something strong." Garrett watched them work together in the sunshine. Victoria's hair was shorter now, more practical, and her clothes were jeans and garden gloves instead of power suits. The consulting business was growing, built on her reputation and newfound perspective on what actually mattered. "Remember about the roots?" Victoria asked, helping Lily tamp down soil. "They have to go deep so the plant can weather storms, and connect with other roots so they can support each other," Lily recited. As they moved toward the house for lunch, Victoria's hand found Garrett's naturally. They'd been taking things slowly, carefully, learning each other's rhythms and fears. Some evenings they sat on the porch after Lily went to bed, talking about everything and nothing. Some mornings Victoria made pancakes while Garrett fixed whatever had broken during the week. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. "How about we take a break from gardening?" he suggested, "and I'll fire up the grill for lunch. Can we have those hamburgers with the cheese inside?" Lily asked hopefully. "We can have anything you want," Victoria said, pulling off her gardening gloves and ruffling Lily's hair. "It's Saturday, and Saturday lunches should be special." They moved towards the house together, Victoria's hand finding Garrett's as naturally as breathing, Lily chattering about her plans for the vegetable garden and whether they should add a swing to the old oak tree in the corner of the yard. Normal family conversations about normal family things, the kind of everyday magic that Garrett had thought he'd lost forever when Sarah died. But as they reached the porch, Victoria stopped and looked back at the garden, at the house, at the life they were building together one careful day at a time. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was lying on your porch that night, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered." "What changed?" Garrett asked. "You did. Both of you. You reminded me that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted makes room for everything you actually need." From inside came the sound of Lily practicing piano, halting but determined. It was the sound of someone learning, growing, becoming more than they'd been yesterday. Do you ever miss it? Garrett asked. The company, the power, the certainty. Victoria considered this seriously. I miss knowing exactly what success looked like. This is messier, more complicated. But when I wake up, I'm excited about the day instead of just surviving it. And when I look at this, she gestured toward the house, the garden, the life they were creating. I see something real instead of just something impressive. What happens next? The question surprised him as it came out. Victoria smiled, the expression he'd grown to love more each day. I don't know. Maybe that's the point. For the first time in my life, I'm not following a business plan or a strategy. I'm just seeing what grows. Garrett pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. I love you, he said, the words still carrying wonder after months of daily repetition. I love you too, she replied, then added with practical warmth, Now let's go feed our daughter before she burns down the kitchen trying to make her own lunch. They walked inside together, toward piano music, and the promise of family lunch, and the 1,000 ordinary moments that were building into something extraordinary. They weren't married, might never be married in any official sense, but they were something deeper. 3 people who'd chosen each other against all odds and kept choosing each other every single day. In the living room, framed above the mantelpiece, hung Lily's drawing from that terrible, wonderful day. 3 figures holding hands in front of a house, looking exactly like what they'd become. A family that had found each other in the darkness and chosen to grow toward the light. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was the life they were building from hope and courage and the revolutionary idea that sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to let a stranger through your door. And every morning, they were grateful for the rain-soaked night when broken became the beginning of something beautiful, when a whispered plea of, "No more pain, my ribs are already broken," became the first words of a love story none of them saw coming. Because sometimes, when you think you're at the end of your story, you're really just at the beginning of the chapter where everything becomes possible.